Thanks, Larry, for letting me know. I'm going to do this recording, and if it doesn't work, I'll just record it without the live participation. Thanks, Larry, for letting me know. I'm going to do this recording, and if it doesn't work... All right, final try. If it doesn't work, I'm going to record it without the live participation. I'm going to start from the top again without giving you the details of the gold and silver and the crypto markets today. We're going to focus on the Paul Manafort trial where he was found guilty of 8 charges, and we're going to talk about Michael Cohen, the Donald Trump's attorney, and his pleading guilty to a number of charges. And in that analysis, we're going to discuss how most people who are looking at this because of their partisanship are rationalizing. They're starting with a conclusion as to what this should mean, and then they're taking their facts and they're rationalizing backwards rather than reasoning forward. And we talked about this in the context of alternative financial media. We talked about it in gold and silver pumping. It's a very common technique. Once you become either politically or emotionally or financially tied up in an event, you then rationalize everything as somehow the facts fit your conclusion rather than looking at the facts as to where they might lead you. So the analysis tonight is going to be focused on how we can, rather than rationalize, figure out what's going on and what it most likely means. So we're not going to start with a conclusion and rationalize from there. We're going to start with the facts and then reason to where they might end up. All right, so the whole thing about Paul Manafort started in connection with the appointment of a special counsel and to look into Russian collusion in the 2016 campaign. Now, Paul Manafort was the campaign manager, so that's, I guess, a good place to start with. Michael Cohen's a different story. Michael Cohen was dragged into this only a few months ago, not from the start, because he was Trump's attorney, and they raided his offices, they took documents, and nothing that he was even discussed or talked about or charged with had anything to do with Russian collusion. However, some of it had something to do potentially with the campaign. But let's go back to the start of it. So at the start of this was all about Russian collusion, Russian interference in the 2016 election. Trump is Putin's puppet. Russia is a threat to our democracy. We need a special counsel. And the call for a special counsel was on 2 fronts: that they had already started a Russian investigation, and then secondly, that Trump tried to impede that investigation through obstruction of justice. So the focus was very clear. It was on a Russian collusion into the election, and then as the investigation droned on, It was about Trump trying to stop the investigation through putting the strong arm on Comey and then eventually firing Comey. Now, we're not going to get into the merits of that right now, but that's where we started from. Now, the basis of the investigation, however, if you're partisan and you listen to Fox News, you hear all the rationale why they believe that that's not true. There's even been a book called The Russia Hoax. There's plenty of books out there that have pieced together documentation, emails, things they uncovered from FOIA, things that Congress has provided, memos, and so on. And they've come to a reasoned conclusion, a rationalized conclusion, that there has been really no evidence in order to even come up with this idea that there was collusion on the in respect to the Trump campaign in Russia. If you look on the other side, the Trump haters, they're fully convinced, however, with far less supporting documentation for their point of view, that that Trump is Putin's puppet, that Russia interfered, and that Russian interference was so strong that actually helped tip the election. So they're convinced that Trump has, quote, colluded, has worked with the Russians, and that the whole election has been tainted. Now, if there was Russian collusion, and it was purely an exercise to figure out what happened during the election, obviously it wouldn't just focus on Donald Trump. We'd be focused on what did the Russians do across the board? What did they do with Trump campaign, Hillary campaign, Bernie Sanders campaign, Jill Stein campaign? We would have testimony from people discussing what, if any, interactions they had, or just in a helpful situation, what they might have seen. But rather, the investigation has indeed focused on trying to show that Donald Trump's campaign actually was the one that was involved. So the initial target in this was General Flynn and Papadopoulos. We're not going to go into their stories, but we know that they've pled guilty basically to lying to FBI agents rather than to any underlying crime of Russian collusion. Now, with Paul Manafort, what he was on trial for was his foreign overseas activities that he had, and the charges are that he had not filed proper tax returns. In other words, he committed fraudulent tax returns, and that he had failed to report a foreign bank account, and that he had made false statements on loans that he never had received. Now, this case against Manafort stems back to, I think there were 5 years of tax returns, all back in the mid-2000s. Not the mid-2000s, not like 2050, but 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, around there. And he had been under investigation by, I think, the Department of Justice a while back, and by Rod Rosenstein, who is now the attorney, the Deputy Attorney General who's supervising Mueller in this investigation. And they decided not to go forward with the case because they thought there wasn't enough information there wasn't enough to charge him. Well, in this case, there were 18 charges, and the charges that dealt with his business dealings with Gates, whom they gave, his business partner, whom they gave immunity, which means they're out to get Manafort, because why not go after both of them? They're both business partners. They've both done something wrong. The difference is that Manafort happened to work for the Trump campaign, and that's where the focus of the investigation was. So they wanted to get a Trump guy, and so they used Gates to try to get him. On those charges, it was a hung jury. Now, they may retry that. They may not. But on the other charges, he was found guilty on 8 charges, but really 5 of them were on each successive tax year for which he filed a false tax return, which again had nothing to do with Donald Trump, had nothing to do with Russian collusion, had nothing to do with anything other than his own fraud, supposedly, if he didn't file the proper tax returns, lift out information. Basically, I guess it was tax evasion that he was committing, and then he didn't disclose a foreign bank account. I suppose the understanding there is that, well, he probably had money in there that he got somehow that he didn't disclose, and he has an obligation, and he didn't file that. And then he made false statements on loans. Okay. Now, none of this has anything to do with Donald Trump, and most people have not focused on Manafort as having shown any problem for Donald Trump at all. However, they're also, the people that are anti-Trump are making a big deal out of this, that somehow this is a big victory for Robert Mueller, that somehow he managed to get a Trump guy on these charges, which have nothing to do with his original mandate. And what Trump's point is that this guy's worked for a lot of people. And I actually have sympathy for that, because there are a lot of people that work for you. You don't know. I mean, do you know what your friends' tax returns look like? I mean, your closest friends, you don't know what they look like. So, and certainly you wouldn't know what they were like 10, 15 years ago. So to somehow make it seem that this is some type of shady character in association with Trump victory, I'm not quite sure that follows. So on this case, looking at it objectively, the Manafort is actually a non-event. And if you want to, look at it objectively, you could, I think, argue, well, why is Mueller wasting his time on this? Because this isn't really the IRS could have gone after them for this. You don't need a special prosecutor who is tasked to do a Russian investigation to uncover the types of things that Manafort had done. Because what he had done, making a false statement on a loan, that's his own personal business. That's his own personal fraud. Failing to report a bank account, that's his own fraud. And making 5 years of false tax returns, that's on him. That's got nothing to do with why you have a special counsel and 19 people working on the case. And this is your trophy guy. You're going to get him, and you're going to prove what? By getting a guy who you find out is a tax dodge, essentially. All right. Now, he does have another case, Manafort, and this one, again, has nothing to do with the Russian collusion, has nothing to do with anything related to Donald Trump. He and, I think, Podesta, John Podesta's brother, had, I think when you do business overseas, you have to register as a foreign agent. Well, neither he nor Podesta had done so, and I think when Podesta found out there was a case against Manafort, he went and he went and made sure he had been registered. But again, not failing to register as a foreign agent is, I don't know, it's a crime, but I understand it's not something that's prosecuted very often. And again, the law is the law. If he's done something wrong and he hasn't registered, then throw that on top of him. He'll probably be found guilty for that, because that one should be pretty clear cut. If he had an obligation to register, he did business overseas, and he didn't register, and he was supposed to register. Now, I don't know if this is one of those statutes where it doesn't matter whether you know it or not, you just have to register, and if you don't, you're in trouble. But if he didn't register, then they should pretty much have a clean-cut case against him. But it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's the same thing when people get all excited that Russia bought gold. Central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. Paul Manafort is guilty. That is all I need to know. I don't see there's a connection how it does any damage or even moves the needle towards any type of Russia collusion, because A, it doesn't show any Russian collusion, and B, it doesn't even get you anywhere near Russian collusion. So I'm not sure getting Manafort or getting somebody in the Trump campaign in trouble means anything. Now, the people who are anti-Trump, they think this is a big deal. This is like Trump's days are numbered because Paul Manafort was found guilty. So all they see is guilty. They see crime, they see fraud, and they figure, well, that's it. That's all I need to know. He's in a lot of trouble. So that's the Paul Manafort side. And I don't see anywhere why that case made any sense to bring, other than they could have brought it 10 years ago. They didn't. They realized they might have a better case now. They might want to really go after him now. So they did, and they got him. But that's not what the special counsel's for. Now, the Michael Cohen case is a little more interesting, but it follows some of the same logic, where people are looking at this and they're either dismissing it out of hand if they're on the Trump side, or they're making it out to be, that's it, that's all I need to know. So there's two elements here. So Michael Cohen pled guilty, all right? It's just like Manafort. Well, if you're an anti-Trumper, that's all you need to know. They pled guilty, and it's Mueller time, and this means Trump is going to leave because two people associated with him pled guilty. Pled guilty to what? Well, that's the answer. It's just like central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. Which central banks? How much are they buying? What difference does it make? Well, as we saw in the quick analysis of Manafort, None of that makes any difference to Donald Trump whatsoever. That Paul Manafort was a tax dodge 10, 15 years ago, that Paul Manafort maybe didn't register as a foreign agent. None of this was done in the pursuance of the campaign. None of this that Manafort did was even done probably before he even knew Donald Trump. So I don't even see how that's relevant. And I look at that as, why is Mueller wasting his time? Because remember, Mueller did bring this case. This isn't like the Cohen case where he dumped it off into the New York circuit. He actually pursued this case. And he also pursued that other case against the Russian troll farm, which I think also was a disaster, because that case wasn't about Russian trolls colluding with the Trump campaign. That was just about Russian trolls buying memes and trying to interfere with the election. Okay, you don't need a special counsel to do that type of thing. That's a general investigation that you can do and finding out what Russia is doing. And he tried to bring a case. He indicted them, and one of the troll farms showed up in court, and he didn't have a way of responding to them because they asked to see the evidence presented against him. So far, as far as I'm concerned, the case has not been made for Russian collusion whatsoever, and that's what people so fervently that are anti-Trump believe in, that this is what's going to take Trump down. Now, Trump may go down, but not necessarily for anything related to Russia, because when you start looking for stuff to hold against somebody, you eventually, if you have an investigation, you will find things. And that's what appears to be what they're dismissing, which I wouldn't dismiss so lightly, but I'm going to go through the analysis on what it means for the Trump campaign based on what happened in relation to the guilty plea that Cohen entered relating to paying off two women, one of them Stormy Daniels. Now, in that case, he pled guilty to it, but he added that Donald Trump knew about it. But before we get into that, let's take a look now at the other charges against Cohen and how they arose. Now, remember, Cohen was going about his business earlier this year. He was never mentioned as part of the Russian conspiracy. And then out of the blue, his office was raided. His office, his hotel room, and his home. And they took a lot of documents, and this was somewhat done, I believe, at the instigation of this Avenatti guy who's representing Stormy Daniels. Now, the Stormy Daniels case is an entirely separate issue. Stormy Daniels claims that she had an affair with Donald Trump and that Donald Trump paid her off. And apparently he did, because she broke the terms of the NDA and said she was paid off. Now, the issue here with Cohen is Cohen was responsible to be the fixer for Donald Trump. And he supposedly paid Stormy Daniels, I think, $100,000. But here's where it gets interesting. Now, this is another one. That is all you need to know. No, it's not. So people are saying, well, that's just a campaign financing issue, and therefore Trump is done, and it's game over, game changer, whatever. No. That the payments were made does not mean that there was a campaign finance violation. Just paying somebody doesn't necessarily even mean it's you have to first prove that somebody intended to break that particular law. But it gets interesting is he pled guilty to it, but he had said in the past that Donald Trump didn't know anything about this. And I think Trump has said conflicting things, whether he knew about it later, he didn't know about it. It's been unclear. But there's not a clear-cut example, I don't think, where they have evidence that Donald Trump said, go pay her off. I think there was the tapes where they said pay her. But they don't all necessarily mean that this is a campaign finance issue. But what makes it very odd is if you want to build a case around this for the people that are assisting, this is game over, slam dunk, is Cohen has said that Trump didn't know anything about this. Cohen, in the plea deal, the FBI director who was announcing this case said that Cohen said that Trump instructed him to do this, which contradicts what he said earlier, but then that Cohen created a 2017 invoice for legal services in order to get paid back the money that he used in 2016 to pay Stormy Daniels. And the FBI people said that that was illegal and that was not honest, and they branded him a liar. They basically said at the press conference that he is not to be trusted and that he is a liar and that he had made false statements. I think the language was he's going to pay a very serious price. So they said that he lied repeatedly and he was dishonest. All right. So if you want to say that Trump knew about it, there's already an issue of a question of fact. Did he know about it? When did he know about it? Did he instruct it? Did he not instruct it? And was it deemed part of the campaign? Because it's not illegal to pay somebody to be quiet. That's so the question is whether it is a campaign finance violation. And the problem is that Cohen has stated different things on different parts. And now that he's pled guilty, they want to say he's not cooperating. But the reason he's pleading, I'm sure, is because they want to make him say what he instructed you, right? So go ahead and that'll reduce your sentence. But the issue is then the FBI also branded him dishonest and a liar. So that one's going to be a tough one. And again, though, it's something that popped up purely as a result of the raid on his office and nothing to do with the initial mandate to go after Russia collusion. Before I get into the rest of the Cohen stuff, I want to point out that these tactics that are being used, and I think they're very clever to use them because they know that the bulk of the population starts with a conclusion, especially if you give them one that is favorable. So for example, if you don't like Trump, well, the best thing you can tell somebody is Trump colluded with the Russians. And then you can present facts to them and they're going to eat it up. If you're dealing with somebody who likes gold, you tell them gold's going to 50,000 because of something China's going to do. Or silver's going higher because of something JP Morgan has done. So for the anti-Trumpers, but I actually believe when you try to win over converts on the basis of telling somebody something they want to hear that is either not necessarily true or not provable, I think it's very dangerous because you run the risk of losing their confidence or worse. So here's what I'm talking about. It seems to me that what they're doing is, instead of trying to find Russian collusion, they're trying to get Trump. I think that should be obvious. And in fact, it's probably obvious to the people who are anti-Trumpers. They cheer on whatever it is that comes out against Trump because they don't care if it's Russian collusion. They care that it's something damaging enough that he goes. And then the people that like Trump, you just tell them and you arrange facts that tell them he had nothing to do with Russia. Well, of course they're going to believe that. Now, even if there's some gaps or there's some questions about maybe he was involved, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear all the facts. They want to read the book and they want to see everything that lines up against Trump. But I do have to admit, though, that it is more compelling to argue that it was a hoax because I see evidence. None of it's necessarily 100% conclusive, but there's research involved that shows a lot of things have happened. And you might believe that the way things are unfolding, that maybe there was some type of plot to hatch this Russian collusion story. And you say, well, wait a minute. If they wanted to hatch a Russian collusion story, one obvious piece of evidence is, well, they haven't uncovered any yet. So are they that stupid? And I say, no. They didn't expect it to go on this long, so that's probably why they raided. They probably thought if they can just nail Trump with this dossier and P-gate and all that stuff, that there would be such an outroar against him that he'd resign and there'd be a lot of trouble. Remember, they had all their people in place. They still had Comey, they had Strzok, they had Page, they had Bruce, that everybody was still, they had Sally Yates still running interference. They still had everybody they needed in order to continue, they had John McCain. Lindsey Graham was against them at the time. There are a lot of people that were just lined up against Trump, and I think they thought that this Russian collusion thing would stick early on and they'd be rid of him. But I think what they realized going further on is, yeah, they managed to get Flynn and Papadopoulos and they had Manafort on the run, but they didn't have anything on Russian collusion, possibly because the Fox News side says there is none. And I tend to believe if there was some, they would have really started to rack up the evidence against them. But instead, they just racked up the points in indicting people like the Russian troll farm, which doesn't prove Russian collusion with Trump, the Manafort, all the stuff that they've done to go after people doesn't line up for collusion. So you say, well, why are they still at it? Well, because they have to get them now. I mean, they can't just say, well, we made it up all along. So I think that's where the best next hope is on this Cohen thing, because he's saying he violated campaign law at the direction of the candidate. Now, I saw this one. This was ridiculous. But this is, again, the partisan style mentality that you have. You have this guy, Lanny Davis. He's like a Clinton attorney. He says this. Today, he stood up and testified under oath. He's talking about Michael Cohen. That Donald Trump directed him to commit a crime by making payments to two women for the principal purposes of influencing an election. So Cohen's interpretation is that Trump told me to break campaign finance law. That's his interpretation. He doesn't say that Trump told me, okay, let's break some campaign finance law. Here's how we're going to break it. Here's the money. You go and pay it over there. He says, if those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? Now, that's a rhetorical question, but it's also, if he doesn't know the answer to that, then he's not too bright. Because if those payments were a crime for Michael Cohen, then why wouldn't they be a crime for Donald Trump? There's two reasons. First of all, he pled guilty to the charges. He pled guilty to the charges. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump is guilty because somebody else pled guilty. Second of all, instructing somebody or paying to pay somebody may be different than in the state of mind. Donald Trump may have thought, yeah, just go away. But Michael Cohen may have thought, I am breaking campaign financing laws by making this payment, and you need to have intent. So, besides the fact that Michael Cohen pled guilty and Trump might not have pled guilty, Michael Cohen may have pled guilty also because he had the stated intent, or the intent to break campaign finances laws, and maybe Donald Trump didn't. So I don't know if Lanny Davis is being disingenuous, or he's just not that good of a lawyer, and he's looking at things and he's rationalizing them backwards, because there's an obvious answer to that question. All right, now I was talking also about how I don't think it's a good idea to use these types of tactics to prosecute political opponents. The reason for that is it's fraught with risk. I think what the Never-Trumpers should have done, the Democrats should have done from day one, was attacked him on policy. But instead they didn't do that. They attacked him on legitimacy, and that somehow he was involved with the Russians. And they wanted to use the apparatus of the state, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, and the Congress, and the media to seed that thought and to constantly talk about the Russia involvement, the Russian investigation, to undermine the president. I think they think that by now Donald Trump would have like an 18%, 10% approval rating. It hasn't worked. But there's an even bigger danger with it not working. If it fails, which I think it's going to fail, the survivors then gain control of that same apparatus. Meaning, they put in their people into the FBI, their people into the CIA, their people into the IRS, whatever it is. And now, having condoned the use of government apparatus to go after your political enemies, you're not in a good position to complain when it gets turned on you. And I think that's the biggest mistake they made, because they have been decimated in the courts. They have now, I think, 26. Trump has appointed 26 appellate court judges. So when they try to use the courts to stop Trump orders, rather than using rationale, they just put somebody, you know, they had those 11th court judge. They just said, well, Trump's not allowed to do that. And then you have Sally Yates trying to stop him with the travel ban. Oh, she's gone now. You have Comey trying to stop him. Whatever it is, Strzok saying we got to stop him. Well, they're now out of the FBI, CIA. They can't stop anybody. And the danger is retaliation. And this is not good for any side. It's not good for the country. So when people are cheering on, I hope Mueller gets him, they're not thinking clearly. They're thinking like a mob, because they just don't like Donald Trump, not realizing that if the shoe was on the other foot, you could just as easily have an aggressive prosecutor who's a right-wing guy and he's going after Bernie Sanders or whoever else. And I have to think that you should think rationally, but what's happened is people are starting with conclusions. They're rationalizing. They're not even rationalizing. They're rabid about getting their way. And they really just want a result. They don't care how they get it. And we're seeing it now also with the social media. They figured, I saw this one the other day, it was fascinating. They now want to take away, Twitter wants to take away the number of followers you have and not display it. And the reasoning is that there is some type of status. If you've got 400,000 followers, it must mean people like what you're saying. Well, it's embarrassing when some schmo has 400,000 followers, who a lot of people like, and then CNN guy has, 1,800 or whatever, and they're trying to say they want to make a quality argument, like, well, these are the real journalists, they should get more respect, don't just pay attention to the numbers. And so when they start using these tactics like kicking people off a platform, shutting down free speech, they're really running the risk, not only of, it's an admission that they've lost. If you can't argue with people, you can't point out how foolish someone is, or how hateful someone is, or how racist, whatever it is, whatever those people are that they want to boot off the platform, well, then you've lost. If all you can do is kick them off, it means you haven't convinced people that they are. Or you're worried that they might be able to convince other people that they're not so lunatic, they're not so racist, they're not so whatever it is, you're hateful, whatever it is. So when you use these tactics where you say, I'm going to use the government, I'm going to use social media, it's quite possible too. The same thing can happen to the social media. The current government could, and if you depends on who's, and this is an argument I'm totally against the government taking over these companies or directing them what to do, but let's say that the Republicans win the House and they decide they're going to go after or break up or force Google, YouTube, Apple, whatever it is, to do their bidding. Well, that would have been a total failed strategy on the part of the left to use it to shut down, because all that's going to happen is then they're going to turn around and shut down the left-wing side. Say they're hateful. They've done everything wrong. So that's where I see how people are looking at this. They're just looking for an outcome. And it's exactly the same that you get with the gold and silver pumpers. They don't care if China's their gold buddy. You can't say anything against China because they're convinced China's going to lead them to gold nirvana. And they don't want to hear anything about China that's bad. They just want to know, how do I get to gold 50,000, whatever. There's no gold in Fort Knox. That means gold's price is going to go up. So they're going to believe what they want. And that's what people are doing about Trump. They just want him gone. They don't care how he's gone. And they don't even care. And that's why they've been given all this false hope that everything that comes out, that some of this is going to do him in. Now, back to Cohen, though. The Cohen thing could potentially harm him. However, the reason I say it won't is he had the same issues. First of all, he had tax evasion. He had done, and what they did to Cohen, this is obvious, they raided him because they knew they could find information about the Stormy Daniels payment. Well, first of all, that's called fruit of the poisonous tree. That might not even be admissible in court. But second of all is, he had done a lot of bad things. Who knew? I'm sure Trump didn't know of his tax situation. I'm sure Trump didn't know, or maybe he did, but I doubt he would, that he owned taxi cabs and he didn't pay tax on them. He had all these businesses, he didn't pay tax on them. Big tax evasion that he made. He tried to get a loan and he didn't disclose $14 million worth of debt that he had? I mean, who does this kind of stuff? But who would know that he did? And again, it has nothing to do with Trump and Russian collusion. And that he himself made an excessive campaign contribution. The only thing in all this, I think what they did was they found Cohen and they found his weakness. They found that, whoa, this guy actually is a scammer. He's a tax evader. He's making false statements to bank. He's, you know, he's not legit really. But they got that one little piece where they said, you tell us that Trump told you to pay them as a campaign finance violation. That may not hold up because now they've already deemed the guy to be a big liar. He's already lied about what happened, and he falsified the documents in order to get paid. He said for legal services in 2017 to get reimbursed, and in fact, originally he said he was just paying it out of his own pocket. So that one's going to be a hard one to nail the president on. Now, politically, if you're against Trump, you're just going to say, oh, he's going down. But actually, if you're for Trump, they don't care about this kind of stuff either. They're more interested right now on that woman who got killed by the illegal alien. They're more worried about fake news, CNN stuff. They don't care about. They're going to just view this as the witch hunt. So, again, these are tactics that I think are destined to fail. And I really think I'd like to see a return to a debate on, a discussion on what Trump is doing on taxes, what he's doing on tariffs, what he's doing in general. But instead, we're seeing this, well, I guess that's the level of the intelligence that the media directs their narratives based on what they think works. And what's interesting is, I actually think in both the precious metals narratives and in the mainstream media, these narratives ultimately fail. When you've been told gold set to skyrocket, silver shortage, game changer, JP Morgan, whatever it is, and it doesn't turn out to be true, you might get some short-term sales. You might pick up a few subscribers on China this and gold back yuan. But ultimately, you're going to lose because you're just making stuff up, or you're rationalizing. You may not be making anything up. You may just be rationalizing to get to your gold 50,000, silver 16 to 1. Trump is going to go down and get arrested. So I think that's what's happened, and I try to analyze things as much as I can. Everyone has emotions. Everyone has some skin in the game in certain things. But I try not to start with a conclusion and then rationalize why that's going to happen. And today I just saw in spades across the board, Trump is going down. Oh, this is no big deal. So the one big deal, the only one that's a potential big deal, whatever Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort did on their taxes has nothing to do with Trump, has nothing to do with Russian collusion. Even what Michael Cohen did with Stormy Daniels has nothing to do with Russian collusion. So Mueller has a separate issue. And this isn't even Mueller's case. He handed this off to the 2nd District in New York. The only danger for the president is it's more political, that he might have paid off Stormy Daniels. It might be a campaign violation. He might have said he knew about it, didn't know about it. But in reality, it's not a big deal. It's a political big deal. And the guy who screwed is Cohen. And he had to throw that in there, I believe, in order to lower the sentencing for his massive fraud. I mean, who knew the guy owned a fleet of taxis? He had $14 billion in debt. How do you get $14 billion in debt? I mean, who loans him that kind of money? All right, well, that's about it. I just wanted to share my thoughts on what I think is going on, which I actually think is nothing. I think they might pursue the campaign finance case against Trump, but who's going to do that? It won't be Mueller. It'll have to be the people in the 2nd District, and they have an issue if they want to pursue that because they got to use Michael Cohen as a witness, and publicly they said the guy's a huge liar. And then he's, so I'm not sure that there's a lot of legal jeopardy for the president. I think there is political jeopardy, but in the state of play we are now, people have said it, it's very hard to separate Trump from his supporters, and it's also very hard to separate never-Trumpers from their thoughts that he's going down. All right, let's see what you guys think. And we got 24 people watching, and let's see some of the questions. All right. Sean Saylor, at least he's got chat this time. Hubzilla, first they demonetize you, then they block you, then they torture you with this streaming interruption. That was bizarre. I kept getting cut off. All right, so what does this trial have to do with Russian intervention, says DW? Well, that's the very point, and I think it's because it's gone on so long now without anything to do, any smidgen of evidence, as Obama used to say, that we're anywhere near some type of narrative developing about Russia and Trump, that they now have to, they got to get Trump on something. And this is the closest thing they have, which is that he paid off a porn star. All right. Cohen says he's directed by the president to violate campaign law. It's problematic to say the least, says Dr. Modesto Esquire. Yes. But it's also problematic because Cohen has been deemed to be a liar by the FBI. That's their own public statement. Repeatedly, they said he's dishonest. And Cohen has said in the past that Trump knew nothing about this. And what supports that argument is he filled out an invoice, sent it to the Trump Corporation, and didn't say for payments to Stormy Daniels. He says for legal activities. So it's not a clean-cut case. That's why it may be problematic, but there are arguments against that. If Trump paid her off, then what do you call a woman who takes money for sex? I'm going to have to think about that one. Matty D. So maybe in the end, this is just an attempt to dig up something in Trump's past. Well, not just in Trump's past, but in the people around him past, and hoping that they will, they say, sing or compose something against Trump. And I think that's what this Cohen thing is, because he hasn't been saying that Trump knew about this, Trump told me to do it. He said that today under oath in connection with his plea, which is a bit odd. We don't know what's on Cohen's cell phone recordings. We've only heard recordings. There's probably dozens. Yes, but indeed, those recordings, remember, were seized. Well, first of all, how do you trust a lawyer who tapes his own clients? One. Two, they were seized in violation of attorney-client privilege. So it's a very shoddy case, I would think. It's almost like, oh, I got to get something on Trump. Where would he ever say something? Let me raid his lawyer's office and then I can build a case. That's basically what they did. Exactly. The Dems think it's payback time for the Ken Starr special prosecution. Yes. And look where the Ken Starr prosecution, it kind of veered off and they started looking at all kinds of stuff. Ken Starr was not investigating Bill Clinton's potential liaison with Monica Lewinsky in a cigar. That's what he got impeached for. So that's where these things they get carried out of hand. Modesto, Trump has insulted the FBI and the CIA how much they're sharpening the knives for Trump. Some are. I think some of the people in this. I think clearly the people, the old line leadership definitely is, but I'm not sure that cuts across the board. They don't want to do his bidding, much less go after his enemies. Well, they clearly, I think it's obvious that Comey and Strzok wanted Hillary Clinton to be president. They admitted as such. They were very passionate about her, and they let her off. There's no two ways about it. I don't even have to be a lawyer. What she did, just changing the language of the statute, which they're not allowed to do. Clearly, what she did was a violation of the law. And to say she was just extremely careless and no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case, he's not even... First of all, it's bad legal reasoning. And second of all, that's not the job of the FBI director to determine who gets prosecuted. But he made the decision because he thought Loretta Lynch was compromised, which she was. And the way that all should have worked out was this passionate FBI people would have looked at it. They would have said, here's all the evidence. Thrown it up to Loretta Lynch, and Loretta Lynch would have had to say, I'm too friendly with Bill Clinton. I can't look at this, so we'll have somebody else look at it. And they would have. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a slam dunk case against her. I'd say the social media companies are worried about lawsuits, not First Amendment ethics. I agree. And that was my argument, that these should not be attacked on the First Amendment. They should be attacked on breach of contract and people suing them for damages. Ultimately, you're going to lose by making up fake news, tell it to Alex Jones. That's right. And ideally, if somebody is, whatever, they're touting false narratives. I do believe, whether it's in gold and silver or politics, it eventually will be viewed as such. Now, it's not the job of the platform to say, look, I think this is complete BS, so I'm just going to excise it from my platform. All right. Jeffrey Gotts, great show as always. One of the few YouTube channels you can find logic employed. Well, that's what I'm trying to do, Jeffrey. I try not to just jump. Unfortunately, people tune in to shows, whether it's gold, silver, crypto. They want to hear the pump. And it's the same with the Trump. They want to hear Trump is the best. These mainstream media, fake news, QAnon is going to get them. That's what they want to hear. Or, if they're never Trumpers, social justice. All they want to hear is Trump's going down. He colluded with Russia. He's a traitor, treasonous. If I just got on every night and just picked a narrative, I can easily make the anti-Trump one with treason and traitor and Putin's puppet. All you gotta do is you just learn the lingo, and people go nuts for it. And you could do the same: gold 50,000, silver to the moon. Trump is the best president ever. That's what people want to hear. They don't want to go through this long-winded reasoning versus rationalizing and looking at things logically, and they're not interested in analysis. They'll tell you that they are. But really, the only analysis they're interested in is basically rationalization towards their conclusion. All right. I think that's about it for the comments. Thank everybody for joining me tonight, and make sure you subscribe to this channel if you do appreciate it, and if you could donate, that would be nice too. You can do that through the Smaulgld site or below this BitChute or YouTube via PayPal, or you can become a Smaulgld patron, or if you think it's a good time to buy gold or silver, you can do so through the Smaulgld affiliate links. Not investment advice, but if you do buy, Smaulgld gets a small commission. You can compare pricing and shipping at SD Bullion, Money Metals Exchange, and Golden Eagle Coin. And they have those, I like them, the cryptocurrency coins. I think it's maybe oxymoronic, but you can buy Litecoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin, all in 999 silver. There's like 7 or 8 of them. They're on the Golden Eagle link. They're on the Smaulgld website as well, and I do get a small commission on those as well. And you can also make sure you get your mug from Smaulgld. You can get a classic, super classic, Smaulgld to go, or Smaulgld espresso mug. The classic and super classic come directly from Smaulgld headquarters. I send them out with a note. I'll even throw in an eraser tonight and mail them out tomorrow. The other Smaulgld items are available at the Smaulgld store, and you've got that link. All right, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and make sure you're back again tomorrow night. Bring a friend at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard.